Mitch Adams. I am married to Sarah Adams. We have been married for 8 years and have twin 2-year-olds that we adopted about a year and a half ago, and a third child that will probably be here by the next time we meet. I was raised in a Christian household. My parents took me to church every Sunday, but kind of more of an Arminian upbringing. Didn't really have a good grasp of the gospel, no real theology, just kind of at church every Sunday, knew Jesus died for my sins, that sort of thing. Until I turned 17, my family moved down to Florida, started coming to Riverbend, and got kind of fed a little more theology through the doctrines of grace. Started, diving into the gospel a little more and getting a further understanding of it, and was saved at the age of 17. So, I'm in DTP basically because I had a desire to just lead my wife and my children the way that I have been called to, and Pastor Scott kind of laid that out, and that's what I hope to get out of this. So, in choosing a topic for my devotional, I kind of bounced back and forth between a few different things, but landed on the topic of suffering just because the past few years, 4 years ago actually, me and my wife decided to start trying to have children, and through a 3-year process kind of really struggled with some things. We spent a lot of money on fertility treatments. We had 2 miscarriages and just really went through a trying time that we had to fully rely on God. So my desire for this devotion is just to encourage each of you to suffer well and to see the benefits of persevering through your suffering. No matter what it is that you're struggling with, if it's a sin, if it's a work situation, a financial situation, a health issue, a relational issue, no matter what it is, I hope that during those times that we can reflect on the gospel and seek to know the way that we are called to handle that suffering. So in that, I'll kind of get into it. So thinking of suffering, my mind immediately goes to the book of Job. The book of Job is just honestly my favorite book of the Bible. I could read it once a week and never fully grasp all of it. There's encouragement in it. There's conviction to know that Job went through the things that he went through, and yet we complain about our suffering. And to know the outcome of it, to know the things that God blessed Job with because of his endurance through it. So, also there's a poem by John Piper that has always just really spoken to me called "The Misery of Job and the Mercy of God," which, if you haven't taken time to read it, it's online on the Desiring God website. There's actually an audio of John Piper reading it, about 45 minutes long. It's really good. But also in the New Testament, we're reminded in James, where James is encouraging his fellow believers to persevere through suffering. He says in James 5:11, "Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job. You have seen the purpose of the Lord, and how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." So, as we're called to do in James, I took that as my devotional, to study James, to be considerate of the things, or to study Job, to be considerate of the things in Job. So I think in that, the first way I found to suffer well is just to know God's providence in our suffering. At the beginning of Job, in Job 1, verses 8 and 12, the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God, turns away from evil?" And then he said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand, and only against him do not stretch out your hand." So that Satan went from the presence of the Lord. So in this we see that God allowed Satan to test Job. God put Job at the altar in front of Satan and said, "This is my servant, test him." It wasn't just a random circumstance that befell Job. It wasn't Satan attacking Job. It was God allowing Satan to enter Job's life and bring about suffering. We're told in Scripture that nothing happens outside of God's will, and that He will use all things for our good and for His glory. That includes suffering. As humans, we naturally just want to, seek a reason or a cause for our suffering, for the distress in our lives, and God will use the circumstances to shape us. There may not always be a definitive reason or cause for the issue or the hardship that we're going through. In the Piper poem that I was mentioning before, Piper lays it out to where God asked Job the following question: would you be willing, Job, to part with all your children if in my deep counsel I should judge that by such severing, more good would be, and you would know far more of me? Such a beautiful and deep question. God is asking Job, would he give all that he has blessed him with if it meant drawing closer to him, knowing him further and deeper? And I take that and I consider that in my own life, not just in our daily, circumstances. So could I, give up my house, but in everything that we do, are we willing to give the things that God has blessed us with to further know Him, to have a deeper and greater love for Him? God has given that sacrifice for us. God has given us salvation through His Son. And we have that hope. We have the gospel and God's sustaining hand to rely on. In Scripture, there are many places that remind us that God is our stronghold during times of trials. In Psalm 66, verses 10 through 12, it says, "For you, O God, have tested us. You have tried us as silver is tried. You brought us into the net. You laid a crushing burden on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, yet you have brought us to a place of abundance." No matter how difficult the trial is that we're going through, no matter how hard we're struggling or how lost we may feel, we can always find hope that God promises to keep us and that He is our great abundance. The world would tell us that abundance and wealth is one thing, but the abundance that God promises us is eternal. It won't be taken away. It won't flee. It won't disappear. And as we die, it will only become greater. As Christians, I think there's great importance to persevering through our suffering. Persevering and having suffering in our life draws us closer to God, as I've said. And not only that, but it allows us to further our testimony to those around us and have opportunity to reach others because of our suffering. In order for God to draw us closer to Himself, sometimes He will break us down and create such weakness that we're left with only Him. We're left with nothing else but to draw to Him. It says in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 and 10, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with this weakness, insult, hardships, persecution, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." When we suffer, we seek comfort, we seek relief, we want to find something to give us reason to just let us out of it. And as believers, that relief should come from God and the things that God has provided for us. It should come from prayer. It should come from spending time in the throne room. It should come from the Scripture that He has given us, for the many verses that talk about persevering through suffering and suffering well, and God sustaining us in that time. During the past 4 years, me and my wife had spent many nights just sitting in bed and going over, the things that the doctors had told us, and looking on Google for all the answers and what we could do to change things and reasons for certain things. And all that leaves you with is more and more desire, more and more want for answers, more and more want for the struggling to just dissipate and leave you. And in that time, we came to the realization that we need only to trust God, that with Him in control and knowing that He will bring a good out of our struggle, that is where our strength and perseverance comes from. That is how we make it through hard times. If me and my wife could have seen the 2 children we have now in the midst of 2 miscarriages, sitting in a hospital while my sister's giving birth and we're losing a child, if we could have seen the 2 children that we have now, there would be no suffering, there would be no hope. And it's such an encouragement to know that God will bring good of our suffering. He will use it in one way or the other to help us. As believers, when we persevere, we are an example of Christ. We show a greater reliance on God, and we give further evidence of our belief in the gospel. It allows us to just be salt and light to our spouse, to our children, to the co-workers and friends that we have. It allows us to be the testimony that we are called to have to them. One of my favorite verses is in Romans 5:3-4, and it says, "Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, and character produces hope." An example of that is of your testimony being extended through suffering is in Job, when his friends and Eliphaz comes to him and is telling him, what sin is in your life? You are struggling with something. There is something going on that is bringing about this calamity and this hardship. There is a hidden sin, or there is something. And Job maintained his testimony throughout. He remained righteous. He never once cursed God. And I love in the Piper poem, Job's explaining to his first daughter after losing all of his children, Jemima. He says to her, "You see, their minds were small, and they could not see painful times apart from dark and hidden crimes. Beware, Jemima, God is kind in ways that will not fit your mind." Finally, it provides us an opportunity to greatly minister to those around us. In Galatians 6:2, we are called to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. As we suffer, we learn things. We realize things that help us to fight through it. It gives us the opportunity to love God, but it also opens doors for us to minister to people. Whether it's lost, whether it's people in the church, we are given connection to people that we wouldn't have elsewise. We can talk to them and let them know that we suffered this way, and we're praying for them, and genuinely pray for people. In the time that me and my wife have struggled with the fertility and going through this whole situation, we've listed 73 different women that have fought to have children. We've made a list and we've prayed for every one of them, and I think at this moment, in 4 years' time, there's only 3 of them that have not been able to get pregnant or adopt a child in one way or the other. I hope that through this my thoughts have been clear, that kind of led you guys in the way that I intended to, and that you'll be protected from anything that I said that wasn't from Scripture. But that's all. If you don't mind, I'll pray with you, and then we'll be done. Dear Lord, I thank you for just this rich time that we have to come to be surrounded by fellow believers, dear Lord, to just have such strong and genuine connection to other men, dear Lord, to fathers and husbands. I pray that you would just continue to use DTP to strengthen us and help us to know how to lead our families, to be godly men in the community, in our workplace, in the church. I pray that you would just be with Pastor Scott tonight as he leads another lesson, Lord. And bless the men that aren't able to be here tonight. Whatever the circumstances are that are keeping them from being here, I pray that you would just relieve them and allow them to be here next week, Lord. I thank you for this church and the men that are faithful to it, for the pastors that continue to sacrifice for this flock today. I pray that you would just go with us tonight, keep us safe.